Welcome to the conclusion of week 10 of our Way Forward workshops, our leader lunch breaks. And we're thrilled to wrap up this 10th week with none other than Phil Robinson, member of the Ohio House of Representatives from the 6th District. Phil currently serves on a number of committees in the House of Representatives: primary and secondary education, public utilities, Ways and Means, and the Joint Education Oversight Committee. His interest in education is deep-seated and quite genuine. He has served as a leader in City Year, first as Executive Director, and now as Senior Vice President for Regional and Site Operations, which means that he oversees 29 sites across the United States. That is 700 employees and a budget of $158 million. He is a boomerang. He grew up here in Northeast Ohio, went off to Washington, D.C. to work on the Hill and in private industry for a while. And we're thrilled that he has rejoined us to lend his abundant talents to moving our region forward. He's been recognized by Cranes as 40 under 40 and Who's Who in Education. He is the proud parent of 2 children and a proud member of the Leadership Cleveland class of 2013. So, Mr. Robinson, thank you for so magnificently modeling your face mask at the beginning of this session, and we look forward to hearing from you about all that's happening at the state level.
Great. Well, thank you, Mary Ann. Hopefully everyone can hear me. As Mary Ann mentioned, I was modeling the face mask. If you're not wearing it when you go out, please wear that, and social distance with 6 feet, please. We're trying to make sure that's happening across this state. So if you ever see me out in public and you don't see me having my face mask on, please call me out. But I appreciate everyone today. Thank you to Mary Ann, Rachel, and Nicole for the invitation. I am someone who can speak personally and as a testimonial to the Cleveland Leadership Center, Cleveland Executive Fellowship Program, the Cleveland Leadership Institute, and of course, Leadership Cleveland, class of 2013, which in my humble opinion is the best class that they've ever had. So shout out to anybody from class of 2013 on the call. I'm really thankful to be here today. I thought I'd share a little bit about why I'm doing this work and then what's going on in Columbus, and really looking forward to the Q&A. So for me, education's played a big role. My parents both came up from the South to the North, like a lot of African Americans looking for opportunity, and chose Ohio, stayed here for the community. And they worked really hard to get my sister and I from the inner city to the suburbs, and went to Gilmore Academy, which was transformational for me when I was in high school. And the reason why I got into this work is really simple. I was in the corporate sector. I had gone off to DC, and I really believe life experiences can really impact you. So I was a junior when 9/11 happened, and that really changed the trajectory of my career, my life. I thought I was going to go to Wall Street. Both my background and degrees are in finance. But when everything happened on September 11th, I knocked on and called on over 100 members of Congress until Senator Dianne Feinstein called back, and I worked there for a couple of years. After that, I went in the private sector, came back home with my wife, lived in Cleveland, thought everything was going to be just going on the private sector route, and I started tutoring a young man named Antoine Collins, who I since started to catch up with again. But at that time, he was a 7th grader with a 5th grade reading background, and decided to start tutoring him. And I learned more from him than, of course, he learned from me throughout that experience. And so at the end of the 13 weeks of doing that together, he gave me 2 things: a plant and a note that said, "You're the best teacher ever," but misspelled the word teacher. And so as we are understanding in this era of the pandemic, just how hard it is to teach your child while also working, I also saw how hard it was to really make educational gains for children throughout this country. And so quit the corporate sector, did the Cleveland Executive Fellowship, which opened my eyes to a lot of opportunities, doing executive alone for a year. After that, found out about City Year, which I see Mayor Akers there. Great opportunity working at City Year Cleveland. And then after that, decided I wanted to get back another way. And so when the Democratic Party called and asked me to run, I thought they were crazy, but I agreed to do it because I thought it was another way to give back. So did that, lost the first time, but I believe you learn more sometimes when you have a setback than you do when you win. And then I came back and ran again 2 years later, and here I am. And the State House is a really interesting place. Just as a funny quick story, I was in a grocery store recently, or about maybe 6 months ago, and an elderly woman came up to me and said, really appreciate everything you're doing. How's Washington, D.C. going? And I told her, well, I imagine it's probably going great, but I haven't been there. And the reason why I bring that up is so many people think their state representative is their member of Congress. But your state representative, there's 99 of us in the state of Ohio. We each represent about 120,000 people. And anything you can really think of in your life that impacts you on an everyday basis, it really is your state legislature. Everything from guns to taxes, you name it, is your state legislature, your state senate, your state House representative who are really making those decisions. And when I got down here, seeing how the budget's created, the decisions that are made, it was really eye-opening in a lot of different ways. And so this has really been a historic time for us at the State House. I came in with about 17 or 18 new freshmen just on the Democratic side, and there was about the same on the Republican side. So a lot of new people in the State House, a whole new generation of folks here who are looking to try to push this state forward. And the first battle we had was picking a speaker. And there was an internal battle within the Republican Party. The reason why I'm telling this story is because they needed Democrats in order to pick a speaker. And the reason why I share that is it's allowed us to, one, have a coalition government, if you will, where it's hard to pass anything without both parties. But it's also allowed us to do more for Northeast Ohio. We've been able to increase transportation to about $140 million over the next 2 years. And we've been able to do a lot of different things that normally weren't happening in Northeast Ohio, who pays really in a lot of ways a lion's share of taxes to the state in order to keep the state operating. So you have that situation going on, and you fast forward all the way over to COVID-19. This has truly been a unprecedented time, something that happens every 100 years. And we're really wrestling with a lot of tough decisions. I mean, and I want to thank every single person on this phone for really your patience over the last 8 to 10 weeks of staying at home, having to wear a mask, a lot of social distancing. And now we're at a point now is how do we shift? Hopefully we don't have a second wave, but how do we shift towards moving forward with the recovery and reopening of the state? And that's where we are now. The biggest issues we're working on today are, one of them is, what do we do if we have, in April, we had about almost $1 billion shortfall. What happens if that happens again in the month of May and in the month of June? And how do we keep this state moving forward? Unlike the federal government, we have to balance our budget. And so that means we may have to make difficult decisions and choices and cuts. And then how do we do that? How do we balance our nonprofits? How do we balance our local governments? How do we keep an environment where our businesses can still thrive? These are really challenging times. I want to commend the governor. Even though he's of a different party, I think what he's done has really been a model for the country of listening to facts, trusting your experts, communicating. There's no such thing as over communicating with the daily briefings. I think he's really allowed people to see a window into what the state government does, what we're trying to do, and the focus. And so we're going to focus on a lot of different things, including how we're going to vote in November. I'm sure a lot of you are probably wondering about that, whether you'll vote at home or vote at home, or whether you'll go to the polls. And we're also going to wrestle with issues around taxes, business, sports gambling. Believe it or not, there's a whole plethora of bills that we're trying to get done since we lost about 2 months this part of the General Assembly to do work. So it's been really humbling. As I mention to people all the time, when I walk in the State House, there's only a couple thousand people who've ever served in the State House. And of course, when the State House started, someone who looked like me wasn't in the State House. And so to be there is really humbling. And it just shows a kid from Cleveland what can happen. And so glad to be back in this state. So glad to be with each and every one of you. And I'll just finish with 2 things. People ask me all the time, what can you do when it comes to your state government? The first piece is just being engaged. Call your member, email your member. When we're deciding issues, the first thing I ask my legislative aide is who's called, who's emailed, who's texting us, because that's the first step, is hearing your voice. 2, hold us accountable. And 3, believe it or not, testify when you can. Please come down to Columbus when you're passionate about issues. I've seen committees where we have sat there and someone's come in and gave an incredible testimonial, and we've decided to vote a different way because of it. And so your voices matter. We work for you, and you should have a state government that makes good on Ohio's promise there. And so The last thing I'll say is, one, people asking, how do you do this and you work another job? I honestly think two things. One, the state legislature is a part-time job. Now, there's questions about that sometimes. It feels like throughout the year, but it is. And I also think it makes me a better legislator for having a family and for working another job to keep in touch with what's happening back home, to be held accountable there as well. And so, the nonprofit space is also going to enter a very interesting space, as I'm sure Mary Ann and others can speak to, where you're trying to figure out how do you operate and exist in an environment where, unfortunately, some businesses may not come back, and as we try to bring back the recovery. So it's a really unprecedented, historic time with the backdrop of a presidential election coming up, and COVID-19. But I do believe we work together. We can really move this state forward. And seeing what's happening this week in Minneapolis with the unfortunate killing of Mr. Floyd, it just underscores there's a lot of people hurting out there. And we've got to figure out a way to create a community and environment in which everyone feels safe, sound, and protected. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mary Ann and Rachel. I think I kept within the 15-minute limit, but just happy to be here and looking forward to the Q&A.
Great, Phil. Thank you so much. And we have had a few questions come in.
Okay.
To start, there's some interest in getting an understanding of any updated timeline for the Ed Choice fix that the state had been working on.
Sure. That's a great question. For some of you may know, Mary Ann mentioned my committees. I'm the ranking member on primary and secondary education, which essentially means the highest ranking Democrat on there. And the voucher piece has really been something that, I couldn't go anywhere for about a 3 or 4 week period where people weren't stopping me. Whether you're going to a church or grocery store, people had a lot of opinions about that. For those who don't know, Ohio is one of about close to 20 states that have a voucher program, which essentially means we take targeted government money to help students who parents feel do not have another option where they're going, to send them to a private school with government assistance. The reason why this is important in the state of Ohio is Cleveland back in 1996 was actually the model for vouchers. And it was originally created back when the Cleveland School District had about a 30% graduation rate. And parents felt as though they, in their own words, were trapped and needed more choices. And so this allowed their children to maybe go to an Ignatius or St. Ed's or somewhere else to get an opportunity. Well, that over the years has expanded. And it's to the point now where people living in suburbs can also use voucher money to go to a private school. This last, when we did the biannual budget, which is about $69 billion for the state of Ohio, there was something that was slipped in at the last minute, which you learn very quickly to make sure you read every piece of legislation, every bill. We thought we knew what was going on the floor that day, and we found out in the Senate they had slipped in a piece to basically expand vouchers to about 1,200 schools. And you may ask, well, what's the big deal? I'll give you an example. My wife and I live in Solon with our 2 kids. Solon is usually rated in the top 3, if not the best public school in the state of Ohio. Well, a parent making up to $100,000 with that proposal could have sent their child to a private school with government subsidized money. We disagreed with that. That got slipped into the budget, unfortunately. My aide was running down on the floor to tell me about it, almost like a scene out of a TV show. And I asked the governor to veto that. And he decided not to. And the reason why we all predicted this is that it could end up impacting public schools. Fast forward, well, the deadline was coming in this February, and we started to see new numbers. And we were seeing that would decimate rural, urban, and suburban school districts. And so we essentially had to do something. So there was a lot of fighting, and it was the House versus the Senate. So we've come up with a stopgap, if you will. So we had conference committee. So for those who don't know, essentially when the House and Senate can't agree on a piece of legislation, we go to conference committee. As a freshman, you have no idea what that is. And so as a freshman legislator, I was asked on my side to go. I said, sure. Well, 50 hours and 300 witnesses later, we realized that there was a lot of work to be done. There were a couple of nights where we all were there to 3 o'clock in the morning and then jumping in our car to drive home. It's a very contentious issue. Schools like Cleveland Heights have lost $7 million because of vouchers, and that's a school district with 89% graduation rate. So we agreed after COVID-19 to put it on hold for a year, and so it has not expanded. It's staying at the number of schools it is now. So about 500 schools are eligible, where parents, if they go one of those 500 schools, based on your report card, you can receive a voucher. We've kept it at that. It has not expanded to the 1,200 schools. However, after this election, because state representatives, you're up every 2 years. So yes, 2020 is an election year. After we get past that, we have work to do to figure out a permanent fix for vouchers. But one of the things that helped us be able to stop that from expanding was having residents come and speak. So we had about 300 people come in person. We probably, got close to 1,000 written testimonials on it. And it was an issue that was ripping the community apart, but it was helpful to hear from citizens so we could figure out how to better legislate on that issue.
So looking ahead also from a fiscal year 21-22 capital bill budget, looking at if the bucket of funding will still be available for improvement projects, or do you think it could be in jeopardy given everything that is currently going on?
Sure. Two things about that, and also one other comment about the vouchers. But to first talk about the capital budget, essentially that it's usually about $1.2, $1.5 billion appropriation process that we do. So the first 2 years we do the state government budget, which I mentioned is $69 billion, and that focuses on operating the state. Then we have for the next 2 years capital budget projects. So when you see major roads that are being fixed in your community, when you see your mayors want to do a major project for beautification or to create parks, a lot of those things are very expensive. We try to help local governments be able to pay for those projects. Well, due to COVID-19 and the loss of a lot of tax receipts, there are two proposals out there. The Senate is looking to do maybe $1.2 billion. The House is looking to do significantly less. I've told communities, especially mayors in my district, if you want to do a project, I would only move forward with it if you felt as though, A, you have the budget set aside for it already, or you know your citizens are willing to be able to help subsidize it. Just because, one estimate we've heard is we have about a $2.7 billion rainy day fund, and we're hearing that that might not be enough to plug the hole of our state budget potentially. And so we're telling folks the capital budget either will be severely delayed or we may not end up doing it. I think at this point, we probably will do something, but it will probably be for essential services, education, things that are on an emergency basis. And then one last thing I want to mention about the voucher piece that I think will be helpful in the future to help communities, whether it's Solon, Cleveland Heights, you name it. We're looking to go to income-based scholarship, which would mean it's not based on your school performance, based on report cards, because the report card process is flawed. We're trying to fix that. Instead, it would be based on economic need. And when you run out of that money, you run out of that money. I think that would be helpful not only to public schools, it would also make it where it could happen across the state versus targeting certain people. And we wouldn't use the report card as a punitive measure in order to address that. And so we can get that done in the next year or so. We hopefully will not see the catastrophic impact we've seen in communities over the last couple of years.
Can you speak a little bit to the mail-in ballot initiatives?
Sure. So we had a little bit of a confusing piece. I do agree that it was good that we didn't have elections in person. You only have to look to Wisconsin to see what happens when people vote in person. Surprise, surprise, people get COVID-19. So I do think it was the correct decision to close the polling places and have people vote by mail. My only issue was that we decided that 24 hours or less before voting was supposed to happen. What we're discussing now is how do we move forward? And just as a point of just clarification, the Secretary of State, the governor, they all cannot decide the election. It's your state legislature who decides how and when and what mechanism elections will be held. We're discussing that right now. There's a piece of legislation pending to make it an all-mail election, similar to what you see on the West Coast and Washington and in Oregon. We support that, at least in our Democratic caucus, and I believe there's some Republicans who support it as well. We just think people shouldn't have to choose between their health and voting. So what we would like to do is provide an option for everyone to vote from home. The difference is our caucus is pushing to make sure everyone is also provided with a self-addressed envelope, your ballot already, and an instruction. So skip the 4-step process now where you have to decide, do you want to do it, fill it in, mail it, get it back, and just simply say, here's an envelope, here's the ballot, please vote, and then turn it back in. It makes the job easier to then focus on just voter education, and it makes it easier for people to vote from the convenience of their home. That's what we're working on now. I believe there might be traction on that piece of legislation by Representative Abrams from Cincinnati. We'll see, but that, from my personal standpoint, I believe is the best way to go, is to have all mail-in ballot campaign, which will change the way you campaign. You're not door knocking. You're reaching people in different ways. But we've called people just to remind them about the election, and people are feeling also disconnected by being at home all the time or on Zoom all the time and not able to get out in their community. So we think there's a hunger to just get information about how to vote and what steps they need to take.
So changing focus to the ban on plastic bags, what can we do in Cuyahoga County to still move forward with sustainability around plastic bags?
Sure. It's interesting. There's always this debate about home rule. And I always joke at our state house, home rule is always in effect until something people don't like. I think Cuyahoga County was ahead of the curve on this. And, we joke in our delegation to Cuyahoga County at the House, this is the Cuyahoga County delegation rule here, where for those who don't know, Cuyahoga County jumped out first in our state to basically say they were banning plastic bags. The feedback we got from grocery stores and retailers associations that they weren't brought to the table, and that they would have more thoughts about how to do this. Fast forward in the House, they presented a bill to basically essentially ban forever municipalities being able to, in their own way, decide whether or not to do that. That was the House version. The Senate version actually just puts a moratorium on for a year. And so this bill is going to come back to the House. And in that regard, it's going to have to go to conference committees, similar to vouchers, which I mentioned earlier. And we'll have to hash out some type of compromise between the House and the Senate. What people can do is please call your state legislator, call the Speaker of the House, call the Senate President. This won't go to committee, so you have to worry about a committee chairman or chairwoman. But call your state representative and state senator, and also call the Speaker and the President of the Senate to let your voice be heard. Because if you don't let your voice be heard, and a small vocal minority is speaking on this issue, we may end up having a situation where we're banned for being able to do things like protect our environment and our community. And so that's the best thing you can do right now. I voted against it when I was in the House, and I would vote on any ban to stop communities from being able to do what they think is best for their environment if that happened. It came back to me again.
So as we start to look ahead, what do you see as some of the greatest challenges facing Ohio in the next year?
Sure. I think a couple, and the list has changed a little bit, Rachel. I'll give you an example. I would put broadband up there as one of the highest needs across the state of Ohio, especially if we're going to have everyone using Zoom or virtually working from home. And the fact that if we have a 2-day at school, 3-day at home, or whatever variation we have for schools, we have a lot of the state where they don't have access to the internet the way they need and should. And so that would be up there as an item, and also to make it competitive for businesses and when you're hiring. Also education. I think that's going to be one of the big pieces. Something I'm working on right now to push is universal pre-K for all 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and also full-day kindergarten. We've seen states from West Virginia to Colorado to others, Georgia, who are moving in this direction. And that just makes you globally competitive, and also helps ensure that you educate a workforce that's ready for the future. So those are just 2 issues right there. Also workforce training. So I'm really proud of the first bill that I put through, ended up getting signed into law by Governor DeWine, which is House Bill 4, which essentially makes it easier for businesses to be able to train and get certificates for employees and put them to work. So we need to do more bills like that in order for it to make it more business friendly, so people can get jobs. And I think the last thing is being able to modernize Ohio, whether I talked about broadband before, but other aspects of how we operate as a state to make it more welcoming and appealing for others to come to the state.
We have time for one more question. So as you are dealing with the work at the State House and hearing from your constituents and the needs that they have, how do you maintain your positivity and drive to continue to move forward through all the challenges?
So on I'll deal with the person. I'll give a personal anecdote first. Whenever I get home and I open the garage door and I walk in, my kids are screaming, they come and hug me. So it really puts everything else really in perspective, because I always joke, if no one else is happy with me at the moment, I know they still are. I'm told that changes when they become teenagers, but right now I'm going to take what I can get. But no, I mean, I think it's an honor to serve. I really do believe in the ability of what government can do. I also believe in just the good of people, and that keeps me moving. One of my favorite quotes is from Barbara Jordan when they talked to her during the whole Watergate situation, and they said, "Are you feeling down in America? Do you feel as though we're at a point where we can't go in the right direction?" And she said, "I believe in the goodness firmly of this country and its people, and I believe we can make this country as good as her promise." And that's something that I live by. And so whenever I walk through those doors, it's an honor to vote, it's an honor to represent. And I think today will be a little bit better than yesterday. And so that's what motivates me. That's what keeps pushing me. And I want to make this state. It was a state that my parents brought me to, and it was good for me. I hope it can also be something that's good for my children and their friends moving forward.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for your insights and your time today. We appreciate you joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary Ann to wrap us up.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And Phil, thank you for all that you do. You serve Northeast Ohio in so many different ways, and we're grateful to have you here and to be the beneficiaries of your abundant talents.